It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, a new search for Madeleine McCann in Portugal. It comes at the request of German police, who've taken the lead on this investigation since prime suspect Christian B was identified 5 years ago. Madeleine was 3 years old when she vanished in 2007. Her disappearance remains one of the highest profile missing person cases in the world. Also tonight, a blueprint for a battle-ready, armour-clad nation. Sir Keir Starmer puts the UK on a war footing. Among the plans of the Strategic Defence Review, new nuclear attack submarines, long-range weapons and investment in air defence systems. But with no commitment on new defence spending, how is the Prime Minister going to pay for it? Plus, claims of racism and misogyny in 999 call centres. I'll be speaking to a police whistleblower who reported a colleague for comments that were so inappropriate she thought he might be undercover, checking the conduct of others. And yet, he remains in his job. And we'll go inside the cannabis farms in quiet suburban homes. Criminal gangs are using rented houses and flats to run their businesses. And police say it's putting the lives of innocent neighbours at risk. Well, that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. Good evening. German police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are due to begin a new search in Portugal as soon as tomorrow morning. Madeleine disappeared in 2007 while on holiday with her family in the Algarve resort of Praia da Luz. Her disappearance is one of the most high-profile cases of a missing person in British history. Well, Sky's Alice Porter is here in the studio with me with what details we have at this stage, because this broke a little earlier today, Alice. And I suppose the big question is why now, after all this time, a new search?
Well, German investigators, they're leading on this missing persons case ever since identifying Christian B as the main suspect. Now, he's currently serving a prison sentence in Germany for rape in the Praia da Luz area and is due to be released later this year. But he denies any involvement with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. But German authorities suspect him of murder, but have not yet had enough evidence to bring charges. So that's why the search is happening now. So for German authorities, very much the clock is ticking on this case. And so they are meeting with their Portuguese counterparts today in order for the searches to happen throughout this week, involving Portuguese police as well.
We understand the British police are not involved in this search, but say they will be supporting their colleagues in Portugal and the German police as and when needed. In terms of the search itself, do we know the parameters of it, where it will be focused on, what new information they may have?
Well, they've got warrants for searches to continue all week, and the area they're going to be focusing on, it's an area that they've looked at many times, but it's the most eastern part of Praia da Luz, and that's an area that, of course, the McCanns were on holiday, but they're going to be looking at 20 plots of land, and it's land that, why it's so significant is it's near the house where Christian B lived, and it's close to where Madeleine McCann disappeared, and ultimately they're going to be searching for, sadly, a body or some indication that she may have been there at that time. And it's worth remembering that she would be 22 years old. And it's, of course, important to remember the family at the heart of this, who, of course, so many years on, still desperate for answers and still no clue as to when this end might be in sight. So we can only imagine that they may be welcoming this new search by German police.
And we understand the search could start as soon as tomorrow, and presumably just this case being back in the news again in terms of the German police looking for more information, anyone that knew this prime suspect at the time or since. That's always a sort of welcome reminder for people. I mean, as we said, it's one of the most high-profile missing person cases in the world, but nevertheless, the renewed attention, I would imagine, would be welcome to authorities.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering as well, if we look at, say, in the UK, we were hearing earlier from the Metropolitan Police, they have an ongoing Operation Grange into Madeleine McCann. This has been something that has involved multiple countries for a significant period now, and it is very interesting that we have what was, of course, the disappearance of a British child, but it's now that German authorities who are very much leading this new search. There hasn't been actually a search for 2 years. There was a search 2 years ago. They were looking at a dam area that was about 40 minutes from where Madeleine McCann went missing. And it is extraordinary to find ourselves in this situation so long after her disappearance.
OK, thank you very much, Alice Porter, there with the latest on that breaking news today. Let's bring in now Kai Feldhaus, chief reporter for German newspaper Bild, who has been covering this story since Madeleine's disappearance back in 2007. Kai, I'll just first start by asking you what you make of this latest development. As Alice said there, you know, Madeleine would be in her 20s today. That's how long this missing persons case has been going on for. What do you make of this new information, this new search?
It came as a surprise to all of us, to be honest, Sarah-Jane. It seemed to be rather quiet around the Madeleine investigation. Whenever we over here in Berlin asked prosecutors, how's it going? How are things happening? Is there any new development? They said, we're still investigating. We're still not done with all the information, with all the leads and hints we got. And this news today came as quite a big surprise to all of us.
Kai, tell us about Christian B, because he has been the prime suspect for some time now. But from what we've learned over the years, since he's been the prime suspect in this case, is that he hasn't cooperated with police. He's denied any involvement. It's worth reminding people watching tonight how he came to be that prime suspect, how he came to be at the centre of this.
Well, police pinned a couple of leads together and figured that he might be the person of interest. The police in Portugal claim they tried to talk to him in 2007, but he wasn't at home, which seemed to be enough to evade the policeman there. But then in 2019, someone came forward and said he confessed to me. A witness that was heard in court recently told police, told Scotland Yard that at a music festival in 2008 in Spain, the two men who knew each other met, and that they were discussing going back to Portugal. They were both involved in petty crime, and the one man asked Christian B whether he wants to go back, and he said, no, there's too much police. And then they discussed the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, according to the witness, and according to the witness, Christian B then said, well, when she vanished, she didn't scream. And this triggered a lot of investigation. This triggered investigation in Germany, and this brought to light a couple of hints and leads that might pin Christian B to this case.
But it's the hard evidence that has been missing thus far. And as my colleague Alice Porter was reflecting there, the clock really is ticking for German police, because the prime suspect, Christian B, is currently in prison. At some point, he may be released. And the history of his time in prison and when he commits crimes is that he goes on the run. And the feeling is that if he is released, he may try to disappear. So can you talk to us about that kind of pressure on this investigation?
Whatever German prosecutors and German federal police have doesn't seem to be enough to press charges up to this point. If they had enough, they would have pressed charges. But knowing that Christian B will be released from prison in latest early 26, more likely in the fall of 25, time is ticking for them. And from his history, we know that whenever he got involvement with the police, he vanished. He left the place where he was living. He left Germany when he got in trouble here. He went to Portugal. When he got into trouble in Portugal, he went back to Germany. So it is likely that he will leave, not awaiting the outcome of the Madeleine investigation. But it's something that we don't know, because, as you said before, he never really talked to police. He never talked to investigators. He sent a couple of letters to media houses, to our media house and to others as well, where he claimed that he's not guilty. He doesn't know anything about this case. But history, from what we know of him, is that it's very likely that he might vanish as soon as he leaves prison.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit about the letters he sent to you? As we've said, you know, he's denied any involvement to the police and to you. He's written letters to you personally and to your newspaper Bild. Can you tell us about the content of those letters?
Well, these letters are pretty much full of excuses of he's claiming that he never really made many mistakes, maybe one or two when he was young, but he never committed any more crimes after that, which is a blatant lie if you look at his register. And the other thing he did, he seems to be a good painter. He can draw very well, and he sent us drawings making fun of prosecution. Prosecution looking into a crystal ball and trying to find the solution to the Madeleine McCann case there. So he seemed to be pretty secure about himself and his situation.
You spoke about this news of a new search starting as soon as tomorrow morning in Portugal by German police, as you know, coming out of the blue, as being surprising. What do you expect to come from it? You know, obviously the big hope is that one day the answer to what happened to this young girl on the screen will be found, whether that is in finding her or at least finding some answers. What do you think will come of the search tomorrow? Because this will, you know, come with such global attention, a new search for Madeleine McCann in Portugal tomorrow morning.
We all wish for the McCann family to find closure and to find peace and to learn what really happened to their daughter. But I wouldn't put too many expectations on this search. I know from sources close to the investigation that police is looking at every single hint and every single straw. They searched the Arade Dam in 2023 just because they knew that Christian B had been there. So this might be something similar to this. They might have a witness or pictures or whatever depicting him in the vicinity of his house. So they start searching there because that is what they have to do. Go after every single hint, go after every single witness. But I would not personally, from the last 18 years, from what we learned from the investigations, I wouldn't necessarily pin too much hope to this new search, unfortunately.
Well, Kai, thank you so much for coming on to the UK tonight to reflect on that developing story. Kai Feldhaus there, chief reporter for German newspaper Bild. This new search for Madeleine McCann expected to start as soon as tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, the government today published its plan to make the UK war ready in the face of threats from Russia and China. Among the plans announced, new nuclear attack submarines, long-range weapons and investment in air defence systems. But with no commitment on new defence spending, how is the Prime Minister going to pay for it? And does the UK really need to be ready for armed conflict? Our Defence and Security editor, Deborah Haynes, has this report.
The Royal Navy on a training exercise, but the dangers are all too real. The Prime Minister says we're in a new era of threats that requires a different order of response.
Every part of society, every citizen of this country has a role to play, because we have to recognise that things have changed. The threat we now face is more serious, more immediate, and more unpredictable than at any time since the Cold War.
But not so urgent that he's willing to turn an ambition for defence spending to increase to 3% of national income by the next Parliament into a firm commitment. It was a weak spot pounced on by his opponents.
The language around the government's announcements is definitely not firm enough. We need to get to 3% by the end of this Parliament. The world is getting more and more dangerous, and a lot of the things which they've announced in this Strategic Defence Review require money.
The funding row slightly overshadowed the unveiling of what's meant to be a key piece of work. This review is 140 pages long, containing warnings and solutions. One part describes the potential effects of war on the UK's way of life. This includes attacks on the armed forces in the UK and on overseas bases, air and missile attacks using long-range drones, cruise and ballistic missiles, targeting military infrastructure and critical national infrastructure, and increased sabotage and cyber attacks. On the state of UK defence, the review says its wider ways of working remain suited to a peacetime era, with innovation stifled and bureaucracy consuming precious time and effort. The result is an organisation that's not currently optimised for warfare against a peer military state. It made recommendations, though, saying, with rapid advances in technology driving the greatest change in how wars fought for more than a century, the UK must pivot to a new way of war. The team that led this review say it's about so much more than rebuilding the armed forces. It's about transforming the mindset of the country so that everyone is prepared for war. One of the reviewers described this as the most profound change to UK defence in 150 years. Whether or not that's the case, though, depends on what the government and all of us do next. And that could require tough choices.
We'd like to spend our money on the things we want, health and welfare and education, and have our potholes filled in. And the idea that you'd spend more money on defence isn't an easy one. But the fact is, if you don't spend enough money on defence, then many of those other things become irrelevant.
Being prepared was second nature during the Cold War. But is the UK willing once again to return to a war footing? Deborah Hames, Sky News.
Well, the government has already been criticised over how much implementing the Defence Review will cost, as well as facing questions about where the money will come from. The fear is that more spending on the military will mean less for everything else. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look at the numbers.
When it comes to defence spending, there's all sorts of numbers, as you'll see in a moment. Perhaps the most important one to focus on, though, is this. 2% of gross domestic product. That's the amount of spending that NATO has said for a long time that governments need to get up to. And when you look at kind of how much spending there is, this is the latest year, you can see the UK is just above that. Look, the UK, 2.3% of GDP. And you've got other countries like, for instance, the US. There's the biggest spender of all. You'll see that in a second. And actually, Poland, as a percentage of GDP, so it's a percentage of the total amount of income across the economy, 4.1%. That's the biggest. But recently, NATO said, look, that should really be higher. 2.5% of GDP, and the UK has committed to that. But even more recently, Mark Rutte said maybe it ought to be about 3.5% of GDP. And if it's 3.5% of GDP, then basically no one apart from maybe Estonia, but really Poland, is over that line. But I said that this is looking at the percent of your total national income that you're spending on defence. What does it look like if you're just looking at the physical, the amount of cash you're actually spending? And the short answer there is, have a look at this. There is one clear big spender, and that is the US, by far and away the biggest spender of all. It's obviously got the biggest GDP, but also it's spending a lot of that on defence. And then there's the UK, and then everyone else looks pretty piddling in comparison. So that's the big picture. But if you look historically, there's something that many countries have in common, including, by the way, the US, which is that spending on defence since the kind of post-war period has been gradually trending lower. So we've all been spending less on defence as a percentage of our GDP. There's the UK, there's the US, with one exception. That says nearly everyone. Who's the exception? Russia. Russian spending has gone up sharply, and actually even before the Ukraine war invasion, it was going up already. It was trending higher. So the plan in the UK, according to Keir Starmer, according to this defence review, is to get this line, which has been gradually going down. It did used to be the biggest component of government spending, but it's gradually been going down and has been outpaced by things like health and social security. We've gone from being a warfare state into being a welfare state. But the plan is to get that line going up. And so that's already costed in 2.5% by 2027 to 28. But there is a plan, or at least there's an ambition, to get to 3% by the next Parliament. And then if it's 3.5%, well, that's that NATO request. That gets that line going higher. But what are the consequences? Have a look at this. This is showing you basically what we might have to spend on various bits of government spending if we're going to afford that 3%. So 2.5% is costed in. And if you have 2.5%, then potentially in the spending review, health goes up by maybe 2.5%, defence goes up by 2.5% as well, but the rest of the departments basically don't get anything in real terms in terms of that increase. But if you're assuming it's 3% of GDP going on defence spending, look at this bar. The rest of the government basically sees that going down. So down by 0.8%. The point being here that you have to find some money from somewhere in order to pay for that extra defence spending.
So how will today's defence spending review prepare the UK for a future armed conflict? And what sort of warfare are we preparing for? Our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, has been taking a look.
The Strategic Defence Review says that we must assume we are no longer in the post-war world or the post-Cold War world or even the post-9/11 world. It says rather that it would be safer to assume we are in the pre-war years before some big European upheaval. So we have to be prepared, perhaps quite soon, to fight a real war, to defend ourselves and our way of life. Well, can we do it? Let's take a look at some of the Prime Minister's most eye-catching announcements. There'll be 12 new attack submarines to replace the 7 that will be retired by the mid-2030s, and a new one built every 18 months. Now, these are the workhorses of the submarine fleet, and they're particularly important for the defence of the North Atlantic. And this is a production drumbeat that hasn't been felt in the warship building business for many years. 15 billion will be spent on nuclear warhead programmes over a good number of years for the new dreadnought submarines to maintain Britain's independent nuclear deterrent. And then there are some less eye-catching but very important announcements on building up essential war stocks. 7,000 long-range weapons will be produced, 6 new munitions factories will be opened, £6 billion will be spent on more munitions across the board. And less obvious, but just as important, big money will be devoted to AI, to robotics, electronic warfare, satellites, and all the panoply of 6th-generation warfare. And not least, £1.5 billion will go into service, housing and welfare initiatives in a recognition that none of the above matters very much unless there are enough service personnel and that they're the best they can possibly be. So, how will this leave us in relation to our allies in Europe and beyond? Well, Britain brought France and Germany and the United States into the review process from the very beginning. The UK shares a major aircraft development project with Italy, and Poland has emerged as a big and important military player. So they and the other allies are all watching with great interest to see if we will really do it and whether this transformational agenda really works if we do. Now, British forces have demonstrated over and over again that they can stand up to Russian meddling. But as things are, could they go to war against an outright Russian military threat, even with its European allies, and still prevail? In my view, almost certainly not. If British forces fought now, I think they would lose, if only for want of ammunition. But if the 62 recommendations in this review are fully implemented, the answer could be yes, they can. The problem is, we really don't know how long all that might take.
Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll hear from a Met Police call handler who blew the whistle on misogyny and racism. The man involved was allowed to keep his job. An investigation is launched into potential corporate manslaughter at Nottingham's maternity services. And Sky News gains exclusive access to a police raid on a suburban cannabis farm, following warnings that criminal gangs are risking the lives of innocent neighbours.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A former 999 call handler for the Metropolitan Police who blew the whistle on racist and misogynic comments by one of her colleagues has told the UK Tonight that the police are not capable of policing themselves. Izzy Vine sounded the alarm after a male colleague made so many inappropriate comments in a single shift, she thought he might be an undercover officer there to check on the conduct of others. Well, that colleague was dismissed. He was then reinstated on appeal, and because he was allowed to keep his job, Izzy left hers. I spoke to her a little earlier and asked her what happened.
The first comment, even saying it, every time I say it, I'm just like more and more shocked and repulsed to say it. But he was dealing with a report, an online report, where someone had written in and said that their partner had raped them and given them an STI and got them pregnant. And he briefly gave me a synopsis of the report and covered his mouth with his hand and said, "She sounds like a slut." And I always say, I just wish in hindsight that right then and there, I was like, stop, what are you saying? This is horrible. Like, but I just was so shocked, so shocked. Someone I'd never met before with the most grotesque opinion.
And that wasn't the only thing he did?
No. It just got worse.
Shift.
Yeah, in that shift. It just got worse to the point where I genuinely thought it was a sort of undercover professional standards training task to see if maybe after the Casey report that we actually were standing up to wrongdoing and reporting it.
Because that review had literally just come out, which found institutional racism,
misogyny,
homophobia.
Yeah.
And to the point where when you logged in on your work computer, the Metropolitan Police's response to that review was on the screen. So.
Exactly.
Everybody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But he went on to make further comments that were equally as shocking.
Yeah. I was in earshot of, you can hear each other's phone calls, and he'd received a call from someone who just arrived to the country, and they'd obviously were asking about help with housing. And it does make sense if you're new to the country and you don't know what service gives you what or who to call. I personally understand that you would call the police. That's, they know, they can just tell you the answer, they'll know. And he got his notes app out and he said, he typed on it, "Why don't you just F off back to your own country?" And at this point, half proud of myself, I kind of gained a bit of courage and I sort of diverted the conversation and said, that's really harsh. People don't understand who to go to for these services. And I think he got the vibe because he said, I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm a bit mean, and it was really awkward.
He also made inappropriate comments about Sarah Everard because you were dealing with a call that came from the Clapham area.
Yeah.
And he essentially called it Sarah Everard territory. Turf.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is all happening in the space of one shift.
Yeah.
And it also continued after your shift because he made you feel uncomfortable again once you'd left the call centre. In fact, you even hung back for 10, 15 minutes after work because he made you feel uncomfortable, and, all women have been in that position. Well, just hang back.
Just avoid.
Yeah, let's not get ourselves into a situation that might be created. So talk to me about what happened once you left work.
I leave the building 15 minutes to 20 minutes after, and I get outside, and lo and behold, he's still at his bus stop outside. Fine, I just was on my phone, avoiding eye contact.
You're at the bus stop on the other side of the road because you're going in a completely different direction. Yeah.
And I got on the bus, sat down, and the doors closed, and the bus pulled off, and then I had banging on the bus, as if someone's missed their bus and they're trying to bang it down. Didn't think anything of it. The doors open, and he gets on the bus, and I'm just thinking,
why?
Like, there's just no reason. And he sits next to me and I say, why are you on this bus? You've told me you get one bus straight home. It doesn't make sense. And he said, I'm coming your way tonight.
You had good reason to feel uncomfortable because he took that bus with you to your tube station. He then took the tube with you one stop and then left.
Yeah.
All of that sounds like you're in a really uncomfortable position.
Yeah.
And you report it. And that colleague was dismissed for gross misconduct.
Yeah.
That worker, however, was then reinstated on appeal. What was your understanding of what happened there?
Well, when I was notified that he had been dismissed without notice for gross misconduct at Scotland Yard, they had said to me after, he will have the right to appeal as anyone would, but you'll be notified within 6 weeks if he does, but don't worry, we don't have any space for anyone in the Met like that, but we'll let you know if he does. I didn't hear anything, and then obviously 4 months later, I'd put the whole situation to bed, and I get dragged out of a meeting and told he's appealed, he's won, and he's been reinstated, and he's been awarded all his pay that he'd lost out on whilst he was dismissed, and all his annual leave that he accumulated, he was taking. So I'd lost money from being signed off and not being able to work, and he'd gained all the money that he'd got.
The grounds for the appeal was that the punishment was too harsh.
Too harsh, yeah.
Were you told of any comments that were made during that appeal process to uphold that decision? What was your understanding of the thought process and why it was overturned?
Well, when I had found out, I demanded to meet the decision maker, and he said to me, he still believed me. I made sure to ask him, do you believe me? And he said, I still believe you. I just don't think it's suitable to sack him.
How did you feel? Because not only did you take a risk to be a whistleblower, also you ended up losing your job because you didn't feel able to continue because you may well find yourself in a call centre with this former colleague. How did all of that make you feel? He's got his job, you haven't got yours.
No, I mean, obviously I made the decision to resign, but how can I possibly work for a police force that rants and raves to protect the public and, you know, help to halve violence against women and girls in a decade and, you know, take reports of sexual violence seriously? How can I possibly work for an organisation that's then re-employed someone that's the complete opposite of that?
A final question, what do you want to come from this? Because I know that you now no longer work for the Metropolitan Police. You have set up an organisation to support those within public and emergency services to share their experiences. And I want to ask why you feel there is a need for that, because so many of those public services, emergency services included, will say, we recognise the importance of whistleblowers, we have hotlines set up, we support them, there is an outlet for them. Why do you feel that you need an outside organisation?
I mean, an external organisation is the most appropriate. I mean, who on earth thinks it's appropriate that police can investigate themselves? And not even only police, government bodies, other emergency services, public bodies. It doesn't make sense that you can investigate your own. It's not enough, and it's incredibly unnerving to me that we, as the general public and, you know, the government, will just accept that the police can investigate themselves and they'll promise to do better. They can't. They've shown us they haven't. And I personally refuse to sit around and wait for another, you know, poor Sarah Everard or any victim of police misconduct or crime. I'm not sitting around and waiting for that. And I want to be able to give other people the confidence to do that. You know, it's an incredibly isolating experience, whistleblowing, and, you know, I've been made to feel like a Karen and that I can't deal with banter and I can't take a joke. But rape victims shouldn't be on the butt end of banter. And I want people to realise that, you know, if you speak out, we can make change. Change doesn't come from the inside, so change has to come from the outside.
And it doesn't come from silence.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Izzy, thank you so much for talking to us this evening.
Thank
Thank you. Well, we approached the Metropolitan Police for a response to Izzy's story. Commander Jason Prinz told us that these discriminatory comments were entirely unacceptable, which is why this matter was brought to a misconduct hearing. We take the former staff member's concerns about the outcome of the misconduct process extremely seriously, and it has been subject to a thorough review. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Police launch an investigation into potential corporate manslaughter at Nottingham's maternity services. Plus, we get exclusive access to a police raid on a suburban cannabis farm, following warnings that criminal gangs are risking the lives of innocent neighbours. police have opened a corporate manslaughter investigation into the failings that potentially led to hundreds of babies dying or being injured. Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust is already the subject of the biggest ever review of NHS maternity services. Now, Nottinghamshire Police will examine whether the level of care provided by the Trust was grossly negligent. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has this report.
Harriet would have turned 9 this year, but it's another birthday. Her still grieving parents will never celebrate with her. Harriet was stillborn, but she would be alive today had the hospital listened to her parents' concerns.
We know what happened to Harriet. We knew the moment that she died. She had negligent care.
Harriet is one of the victims of the country's worst maternity scandal. And now the hospital trust who failed her is facing a corporate manslaughter charge.
We have mixed emotions. You know, it's absolutely great that this investigation has been opened, but there has to be accountability at an individual level. They go into work every day and some of them don't provide safe care, and there have been no sanctions, and that's what needs to change. So alongside the corporate manslaughter, we really believe that there needs to be individual accountability or the culture at the hospital won't change.
Nottingham University Hospital Trust is the subject of the largest ever NHS maternity review, being led by senior midwife Donna Ockenden. It includes more than 2,000 experiences of failing maternity care at the Trust, including deaths and injuries spanning more than a decade from 2012 onwards. In 2023, Nottinghamshire Police launched a criminal investigation into the Trust's maternity services. In a statement, Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust said, "We know how important the police investigation and independent review are for the affected families, the Trust and our local communities. We hope that affected families receive the answers that they deserve."
I think that there needs to be, in effect, a confession. We did wrong. I did wrong. That's what that means to me. How was it allowed to happen? Who knew what, when, and why were they still employed, and why was there no accountability?
These searching questions remain unanswered, but Jack and Sarah might now be taking one step closer to the truth. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Police are warning that organised criminal gangs are increasingly using rented houses and flats to operate illegal cannabis farms, putting the lives of innocent neighbours at risk. Sky News has been given access to an operation run by Greater Manchester Police, who raided a house on an otherwise normal suburban street. Here's our Chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam.
It's early in the morning and we're with officers from Greater Manchester Police on this quiet suburban street. They suspect a house is being used as a cannabis farm.
Please, stay where you are. Clear.
Inside, they find one room full of cannabis plants. This alone enough to generate an estimated £20,000 per crop. Upstairs, there's cannabis, bagged up and ready for distribution, prepared in an elaborate drying room, and with the high electricity demand obvious. The man who was in the house is arrested on suspicion of cultivating cannabis. In the meter cupboard outside, police find another telltale sign.
There's a bit of wiring behind there.
Right, so you think they put it behind? So the electricity gets bypassed in order to avoid big electric bills because a substantial amount of electric is required. We've seen a lot of fires recently in premises that have been set up as cannabis farms because the electricity isn't like the way that it's set up is not safe.
The risks of cannabis farms were highlighted by the death of 7-year-old Archie York, killed in an explosion caused by chemicals being used in a cannabis factory in a block of flats. Increasingly, police say they're finding cannabis farms inside rented properties, making it harder for them to track the organised crime gangs responsible. The most junior members, known as the gardeners, happy to take the rap.
It's exceptionally difficult. Obviously, When you get a cannabis farm and the gardeners arrested and detained, they plead guilty at the earliest opportunity, it's a quick win for policing. But what's required is to go beyond that and start to look at who's controlling that. What we see with those cannabis farms is rival organised crime groups will actively target those. Massive amounts of money to be made in cannabis, without a shadow of a doubt, and they'll use significant violence against anybody that gets in the way.
We only found out when we went into the property. I can only explain it as horrific.
Even the chief executive of the British Landlords Association fell victim.
Members, they are shocked. They didn't know it could happen. They are not aware of the telltale signs. They have the same regrets, what I experienced, that regular inspections, and if somebody's offering you a larger bulk rent, then you should question that.
400 cannabis farms have been detected in Greater Manchester in the last year alone. The rewards are huge, the costs low, and those living nearby unaware they face the greatest risk of all. Greg Milam, Sky News.
So to come on the programme, if you like to wear Speedos with your scrum cap, we'll hear why you might fancy trying underwater rugby. And in the rest of the sport tonight, has Max Verstappen finally admitted he was in the wrong over his wheel-to-wheel clash with George Russell?
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd. Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Coming up, if you like to see your second rows in snorkels or wingers in water wings, we've got Just the Thing coming up for you. Have you ever played underwater rugby?
No. It sounds...
we were just watching some footage of it in the break, and Teddy was like, what is that? I would explain all to you in a few minutes' time. But let's talk about tennis first, shall we? From one Draper to another. Jack Draper, I was listening to the radio this morning on the way in. A lot of chat about Jack Draper.
Understandably,
and this game, and it was all done and dusted by the time we got on air this evening. So talk me through what's been happening.
Well, he did win the first set against Alexander Bublik 7-5 for Jack Draper. It was this wonderful rise up to the 5th seed at Roland Garros, but then he lost the next 3 sets, 6-3, 6-2, 6-4. He departs the men's singles, but I suppose it has been a great year. We have to reflect on the fact that he went out last year at this stage in the first round. He'd never won a French Open match before this year, only 23 years of age, Jack Draper. And he lost to Jesper de Jong, 176th in the world Dutchman last year. So I think it is a good journey. But he's out after the defeat to Alexander Bublik. I suppose he starts to focus now on the grass court and Wimbledon. And who knows? It's been this great rise. He won the Indian Wells ATP 1000 event. He got to the semi-finals of the US Open last year. But disappointment for Jack Draper today. Good story with Alexander Bublik, though. We talk about sports science and training and underwater rugby, but Bublik was really struggling this year. He was world number 17 last year, but actually went away and decided he was practicing too hard. He wasn't getting any better, so he went to Vegas and had a 3-day blowout, and since then he's won a tournament, and now he's beating Jack Draper at Roland Garros. So he said that that's an advert of different sorts for a different approach in the sports science that we hear about these days.
Don't be spreading that news around the circuit. The coaches won't be too pleased, will they? But double disappointment for the Brits today.
Yeah, it was. Cam Norrie bowed out in straight sets. He was in the last 16 stage for the first time in his career, but he lost to Novak Djokovic, who at 38 won his 100th ever match at Roland Garros. He's won 3 titles there, so it'd be great for him to get a 4th, but significantly it would be his 25th Grand Slam title. Looks like Jannik Sinner's going through at the moment against Andrei Rublev. Carlos Alcaraz is already through, so the big 3 there, no joke. Novak nobbles Norrie, the headline there. So he's through, and it's unfortunate the British men's singles interest is over, but some great players. It's coming up next, a Formula 1 Drivers' Champion with a rare bit of contrition, perhaps.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Andrea, 2 years on from your departure from Leeds United, how pleased are you to see them back in the Premier League?
I'm very happy. As a fan of Leeds, as ex-chairman, I'm very, very glad for the fans that they are finally back in where they belong, the Premier League. And it is a big release for me because honestly, I had a very traumatic and difficult exit, and finally I feel now that the destiny adjusted everything, and I can come back to Leeds soon.
Do you still speak to Parag Marathe and the ownership group?
Yes. I speak to him normally a couple of times every month, and we stay in touch during the season. We comment about Leeds, we comment about other football trends, but particularly about Leeds. And we just spoke recently this week when he was in Leeds, but also he was busy in Rangers for looking at new opportunity. I think Parag and the guys involved supporting him and the new management will have the credibility and the experience, the know-how to take it to the next level. So they can take back the route and the direction to bring back Leeds as a, I hope, top club and back to Europe one day.
How difficult will it be for Leeds, that jump from the Championship back to the Premier?
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Speedos, snorkels and scrum caps. Welcome to the world of underwater rugby. Although there doesn't appear much resemblance to what happens on the turf at Twickenham, it's underwater for a start. That didn't stop a group of players in another part of southwest London setting up the country's first club. For more than a decade, players at Pure Underwater Rugby in Putney have been championing the sport. Unlike league or union, the ball can be passed in any direction. It's a full 3D experience. You don't score between the posts. Instead, you aim to get the ball into a bin-shaped goal. Well, now the club are trying to entice more scuba-loving scrum enthusiasts to give it a go. It looks like a feeding frenzy there, doesn't it, in some kind of fish tank. But I'm sure there's some tactics in it. Let's talk to Nick Harvey. He is the founder of Pure Underwater Rugby Guildford and joins me in the studio now. Hello, Nick.
Hello there.
Just looking at those pictures, very different to what we expect from rugby and speedos and flippers for a start. How does rugby translate into the pool?
So, I mean, it's called underwater rugby because it's full contact. But ultimately, it's as you've seen on the video, you're in a deep pool, 4 metres deep or thereabouts. That's what we play in Putney. You've got snorkel, flippers, mask, and you're trying to wrestle a ball which is a slightly smaller diameter than a football, filled full of salt water, into a large waste paper basket.
I mean, is the goalkeeper allowed to sit in the basket there? Because that's effectively what was happening. It looked like, is that a goal? Would you call that goalkeeper?
Yeah,
defender?
Goalkeeper, exactly right.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 main positions. You've got a goalkeeper, which does exactly that. He puts his back on the goal and uses the fins to put pressure down to hold himself down or themselves down. You've got defender, which lies in front, and then attackers, which do, as I say on the tin, they attack the goal.
Can we talk about the safety aspect? Because, as you said, it is contact.
Yeah.
You have to hold your breath. I mean, look at that. There's a lot of wrestling that goes on.
There
Again,
is.
We're used to seeing a bit of that at Twickenham. But talk to me about the safety aspect. When's a good time to come up for air, for example?
Well, when you have to breathe. But, yeah, it's...
Top tip.
That's a lovely part of the tactics, is deciding when you're going to hold your breath, when you're going to push yourself, and when you're going to come up to breathe. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the game. In terms of safety, I mean, very few injuries. Everything's slowed down. We get a lot of ex-rugby players who maybe have done their knees in, done their shoulders in, that still want to sort of play the game, but they're able to do it in a much slower pace and less sort of risk of injury.
And do you have mixed teams, men? So men and women can play the sport together?
We play together all the time. And I think there's a lot less disparity between men and women in underwater rugby and as there is in overland rugby, I guess we'll call it, because it's not just about strength. It's about speed, it's about tactics, it's about the good breath hold, which a lot of different people of all sort of shapes and sizes can compete very well in.
And it isn't a new sport as such. I was reading about this earlier. It's actually been around since the 1960s.
Yeah.
And it's popular in other parts of the world, Australia and New Zealand, for example.
Yeah, well, it's more popular in Northern Europe and Colombia, bizarrely. But yeah, most sort of cities in Northern Europe, they've got a team or two, and there's a much bigger presence. Here we've got Pure, which is based in London and Guildford, and then there's another team in Cheltenham. So we are desperately trying to grow the sport, which is why we're very thankful being brought on today.
Yeah.
Hopefully reach out to find some more people to join us.
Well, we saw this, and what struck me again was just the images of it, because obviously it's a contact sport underwater. You're used to seeing synchronised swimming underwater, which is all very graceful, used to water polo. And, of course, regular swimming. This looks completely different. What's the entry point for people? Because normally when people start in a sport, it's at school, and obviously this isn't in schools at the moment. But what's the ambition with this in the UK?
Where do we want to grow it?
Yeah.
We need more people. We want more people. We need to get more people into race of our competitive level. We're doing well. We're doing better, and we're having a lot of help. But yeah, the more people that come along and give the sport a try, the better.
So what's the criteria? Presumably, obviously, good swimmer. Don't necessarily have to have a background in rugby?
No, absolutely not. I think there's fewer people that come from rugby than despite the name suggests. We always say if you can hold your breath for 30 seconds, that's a very, very good start. And we're very good with new people. We're very encouraging of new people. So anyone that comes to give it a try at any level, just come and give it a try. 30 seconds of breath hold is a very, very good start.
Oh, well, listen, Nick, it's really interesting, and good luck with it. Like I said, when I saw the images, I was like, we have to talk about this, because it just looks... It looks different, doesn't it?
It's very different.
And I think, like you said, people who are looking for a sport that's a bit different and something new, this could be the sport for them. Nick Harvey, founder of Pure Underwater Rugby in Guildford. Really good to have you in the studio tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your time. Right, let's have a little look at the weather, shall we?
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's looking unsettled for the next week or so, with widespread showers and some more prolonged rain, but the south should be drier mid-month. Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland will be wet this evening, and it's going to be windy in the west with coastal gales developing there. The bulk of Britain, meanwhile, is looking fine. Rain will extend across much of the north and west tonight, giving way to blustery showers later. Wales and southwest, central and northeast England will turn wet by the morning. The southeast is looking dry and clear. It's going to turn windy everywhere. England and Wales will see increasingly showery rain clearing into the southeast tomorrow morning, with brighter skies and a few showers moving in behind. Elsewhere, most parts can expect sunny spells and blustery showers, with the showers concentrated in the north. It's going to be cool and very windy. The afternoon will see rain in the southeast clearing towards the Channel.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
That's all from the UK tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Up next, it's Yada Hakim with The World. See you tomorrow.